Hello students, welcome to the Hindu News Analysis by Baji IAS Academy. Today we will discuss some of the most important and relevant news articles, and they are important for both prelims and mains exam of UPSC. Okay, so before actually discussing all these important news articles, please subscribe to Baji IAS Academy YouTube channel because we are coming up with the new courses as well, so that you will get updated about all these courses. Okay, they will be helpful in your examination, right? So these are the important articles given in the Hindu newspaper. Okay, so all these articles are very important, both for the prelims and mains exam. The first important article is with respect to the Posh. Okay, the Prevention of Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplaces Act 2013. Okay, so recently Supreme Court expressed its it expressed that the act has not been implemented properly in various government departments and center at the central level, state level, and even at the district level. Okay, so the Posh Act 2023 mandated that every department or the every organization or every company which employs more than 10 employees mandatorily constitute the internal complaints committee. Okay, so Supreme Court came down heavily on both center and state governments over the poor state of implementation of the Posh Act 2013. So in this context, we will comprehensively try and understand the Posh Act, its shortcomings, why our center state governments are reluctant to implement this legislation in a letter and spirit. The next article is with respect to the government bans import of 928 items to promote domestic defense industry. Okay, so there is a list called a positive indigenization list. Okay, so when the government ban import of a particular defense equipment, then those defense equipment will be manufactured domestically, either by the private company or with the help of the public sector undertakings. Okay, as part of this article, we need to understand what is positive indigenization list. The next article is model code of conduct. So this is also very important. The next is India cuts windfall tax on petroleum to zero. So what is windfall tax? We have to understand. Now next article is one stop centers for zero waste to be launched in cities. Okay, so with a special emphasis is on the circular economy across the country. Okay, so it is more sustainable way of handling waste, and it also results in sustainable development. Next article is government doctors told to prescribe only generic drugs. So what are the generic drugs and what is the difference between generic drugs and branded drugs? We need to understand. See, this is the first article on sexual harassment in the workplace. I have told you the Posh Act was passed in the year 2013. Okay, so prior to the Posh Act, Vishakha Guidelines, okay, Vishakha Guidelines were issued by the Supreme Court. Okay, so these guidelines also with respect to the prevention of sexual harassment of women at workplaces, and these Vishakha Guidelines were issued in the year 1997. Okay, so because there was a legislative vacuum, there was no legislation, and when there was a no legislation, the Supreme Court come up with the Vishakha Guidelines. Okay, after Vishakha Guidelines, the legislation, the Parliament have passed the Posh Act, Prevention of Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplaces Act 2013. Now understand what is the Posh Act 2013. This is Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition, Redressal Act, and this act was passed in the year 2013. Now Posh Act includes unwelcome remarks and actions by a male individual towards a female employee in a particular company or in an organization. This also include physical advances, sexual favors, demand for sexual favors, levered jokes are all considered as unlawful. Okay, under the Posh Act, Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition, and Redressal Act. Now, complaints to be filed within 3 months of any incident. If an incident which took place in a company, then the complaint has to be filed or registered within 3 months of the incident took place. The next is Internal Complaints Committee handles the posh cases in a company with more than 10 employees. Okay, so under the act, every company mandatorily constitute the internal complaints committee. Now, apart from this, inquiry has to be completed within 90 days. In case of any case filed against an individual under the Posh Act, the the procedure or the inquiry has to be completed within 90 days. And listed companies have to disclose number of cases filed every year. Okay, so the employer have to submit the audit report of the number of complaints filed in his company or her company, and also the action taken report should be submitted to the district level officer. Now, what this Posh Law 2013 says, apart from the above mentioned provisions, okay, the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition, Redressal Act 2013 is meant to address grievances of women across formal and informal employment. For example, in the case of formal employment, there is an internal complaints committee, and women who face sexual harassment can complain at the internal complaints committee, and internal complaints committee can institute an inquiry, okay, an inquiry against a employee who have committed the sexual harassment, the act of sexual harassment against a woman. Okay, now in the case of informal employees or in the case of the domestic woman, a district level committee is also constituted, okay, under the act, and all the informal women can register the cases at the district committee. Okay, so this act mandates or address the grievances of women across formal informal employment, and that includes clients, customers, domestic workers, contract employees, volunteers, professionals, trainees, interns, and it applies to all workplaces including non-traditional setups. Okay, so all the categories of women will be covered under the Posh Act of 2013. Okay, so what are the remedies available for women in case she had gone through the act of sexual harassment? Okay, the remedies include a woman who has experienced harassment can directly lodge a complaint with the police. Okay, instead of going to the internal complaints committee, she can directly lodge a complaint at the police station. Secondly, it is mandatory for the police to register an FIR without a delay. Immediately, the police have to take up the matter and they register complaint immediately. However, along with the above mentioned provisions, complainant statement is always recorded by a woman officer or in the presence of a woman police. Okay, so this is part of sensitization of women officers or sensitive towards the victim who already faced the sexual harassment at a particular organization or a company. Okay. However, if the police finds the complainant employer internal committee did not do its job, then the company management and the panel members are liable to face action. Okay. So once a woman register a complaint in a police station and the inquiry finds that the employer and the company management has not did enough to resolve the grievances of a woman victim, then the company and the management is liable for legal action. Okay, now the sexual harassment in the workplace. Okay, so this is important for gs2 paper gs2, and this is also very important for ethics case studies because it constitutes issues or it constitute like you know when a woman faces sexual harassment. Okay, so what should one do? Okay, so if it happens to you, what should be your response, what should be your reaction, and what are the options available for the resolution of such an issue, and also this also contains if it happens to someone else, what should be your response. Okay, now first understand what exactly is the sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is engaging Sexual harassment is engaging in a course of vexatious comment conduct. Okay, so that is known or ought to be known to be unwelcome. Okay, so any vexatious comment or conduct that is generally considered as unwelcome. Now, there are some prohibited grounds of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. So whenever a comment is made on these grounds, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and then it is generally considered as sexual harassment. However, in some cases, one incident could be serious enough to be sexual harassment. Okay. However, one incident can also be considered as sexual harassment on among the above mentioned categories. Now, the sexual harassment includes but is not just limited to. Okay, so these are the categories of sexual harassment: asking for sex in exchange for benefit or favor, or designing words and comments against a woman employee. Thirdly, degrading pictures and objects of a woman. Fourth, making unnecessary physical contact, including unwanted touching and feeling uncomfortable. Fourth, calling people sex specific derogatory names or abusing women with the sex specific names. Fifth, repeatedly asking for dates and not taking no for an answer. Okay, and it also includes making sex related comments about person's physical characteristics or actions, saying or doing something because you think a person does not conform to the sex role stereotypes. It also includes making sexual jokes, bragging about sexual powers, refusing to prefer a person by their self-identified name, requiring a person to prove their gender. Now, all categories of acts come under the sexual harassment, and they will be adequately covered under the Prevention of Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act 2013. Now, in this context, what is the responsibility of employer? In a company, there are employees and employer as well. Okay, so in this context, what is the responsibility of an employer? Employer have to create a safe and respectful work environment and work culture in a particular company. Apart from that, the employer should develop policy and procedures for the safety and security of women, promptly and appropriately respond to issues as they arise. Whenever an issue like this arises, the employer should promptly and appropriately respond to the issues, and he should be sensitive towards the needs of the woman. Okay. Fourthly, educate managers about the roles and responsibilities, and also ensure senior managers lead by example. So these are the all responsibilities of an employer in a company. So what if happens to you, the act of sexual harassment happens to a particular individual? What should do? Remember, it's not your fault, and talk to someone you can trust. Okay, so all these points you can effectively use in ethics case studies. Okay, ethics case studies. So please go through all these points, because woman is a very important issue, and every year there will be at least one case study on woman issues. Okay, so you can reflect these points in those case studies. And it says, remember, it's not your fault. To talk to someone you can trust and document the incidents that happen to a woman is very important. And also, it is very important to learn about the rights and options getting behaviors to stop. Okay, so it is also important for every working woman to know their rights. Okay, and the options available if they go through such an incident. So what are the options available for a woman for the resolution of any act of sexual harassment? against her. So it is safe if you are comfortable, speak to the harasser. Okay, now speak to the harasser and also speak to the manager and the human resources head. And next, go to the next person in the authority, and if the harassment further continues, and also make a formal complaint with the internal complaints committee, or register a complaint with the internal complaints committee, and it can constitute an inquiry. If you are threatened or assaulted, the woman can contact the police. Okay, so these are the options which are generally available for the resolution of such an act of sexual harassment. Next, if it happened to someone else, either the friend of a woman, if it happens to her, then the options available are: object when someone sees a sexual harassment. Okay, so objecting the sexual harassment and tell the person this behavior is not okay, and if possible consequences, explain the consequences of such an act. And also educating the oneself over the rights and opinions, options available after such an act. Okay, so thirdly, it is important to support co-workers who disclose they have been sexually harassed. And fourth, respect whatever choice person makes. And lastly, request that the organization develops clear policies and procedures so that the organization itself can promote and facilitate safe and conducive working environment for women. Okay, now we have discussed the Posh Act. Okay, Posh Act 2013. Now, a protection of women from the Sexual Offences Act 2013. However, before to 2013 Act, there was a Supreme Court judgment in the year 1997. Okay, so the Supreme Court has issued a range of guidelines over the protection of women at so prevention of sexual harassment of women at workplaces, and these guidelines are known as Vishakha Guidelines. Okay, so what are the Vishakha Guidelines? Vishakha Guidelines are actually a set of procedural guidelines for use in India. Okay, so they are actually a set of procedural guidelines in India in the cases of sexual harassment in workplaces. Okay, so, what are the highlights of Vishakha Guidelines? Vishakha Guidelines was stipulated by the Supreme Court in India. Vishakha, uh, Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan case 1997. Okay, so this case is with respect to sexual harassment of women at workplaces. Okay, now followed by this judgment, Parliament passed the Sexual Harassment Act 2013. Okay, so it also set out processes to be followed for making complaint and inquiring into the complaint in a time bound manner. Please remember, earlier also we have discussed that the complaint should be registered within 70 days after the incident took place. Okay, so apart from this, this issue has to be inquired upon 90 days. Okay, so therefore, the Posh Act 2030 has also mandated certain time frames to resolve this issue in a time bound manner. And this act also requires employer to set up an internal compliance committee. Constituting an internal compliance committee is mandatory if a company has employing more than 10 employees. More than 10 employees. Now, apart from that, it suggests organizing awareness programs in the company or in the organization and department, and these awareness programs should be conducted at regular intervals for sensitizing employees on the issues and implications of workplace sexual harassment. However, along with that, the sexual harassment should be treated as misconduct under the service rules and initiate action for misconduct. Okay, so these are all the Vishakha guidelines and the highlights of the Vishakha guidelines. Now, what this article is exactly about. See, we have discussed that the Posh Act was passed in the year 2013. Now we are in the year of 2023. Now, 10 years after the 10 years after the sexual harassment of women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition, Redressal Act came into force, the Supreme Court of India has said there are serious lapses across the country in the implementation of Posh Act 2023. Okay, so recently Supreme Court has come up with such a strong words that the Posh Act has not implemented in letter and spirit, especially the internal complaints committees are not constituted. Now, apart from this, the Supreme Court has also expressed its displeasure over the governments, both center and state governments, for its sorry state of affairs in its departments and organizations, and they do not constitute the internal complaints committee, and several positions within the internal complaints committee are also vacant. Okay, so this works as a disincentive on the part of the woman. They often resign, either they continue with the sexual harassment in case of a non-functional internal complaints committee, or they resign. Okay, so this will further perpetuate the harassment against women in the society. Now, please understand how was the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Against Women in Workplaces Act 2013 Act was formed. Please remember, in the year 1992, Banwari Devi, she is a social worker and she was gang raped by 5 men after she tried to prevent a marriage of a 1-year-old girl in Rajasthan. Okay, so several complaints were filed in the Supreme Court after this incident, and Supreme Court noted that there was an absence of any law. Okay, please remember this case was filed in the year 1992 and the Posh Act was passed in the year 2013. Okay, so Supreme Court rightly noted that there was an absence of any law which provide effective protection and enforcement of basic human right of gender equality. Okay, so these are the words of the Supreme Court. And guarantee against sexual harassment at workplaces. And in the same case, Supreme Court has laid down set of guidelines in the year 1997, and these guidelines are known as Vishakha Guidelines. And these guidelines will fill the statutory vacuum till the law could be enacted. Okay, so till the law is made, these guidelines, whatever guidelines the Supreme Court has mentioned as part of the Vishakha Guidelines, will take or will fill the vacuum, will fill the statutory vacuum, uh, both at the center and states levels. Now, Sexual Harassment of Women Prevention and Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013 was passed after the Vishakha Guidelines. Okay, please remember Vishakha Guidelines were given in the year 1997, and following the Vishakha Guidelines, Parliament introduces a bill and passed this act, passed Posh Act in the year 2013. Now, what this law says, we already discussed what the Sexual Harassment of Women Prevention and Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013 is mean to. Okay, this is primarily to address the grievances of women across all informal and formal employment categories. Okay, so this act includes all these categories of women. Okay, so we already discussed this issues. Okay, now what are the requirements imposed on employers? Okay, so this act imposes certain requirements on the part of employer. Okay, so they include any employer with more than 10 employees to form an internal complaints committee. Okay, so this can be approached by any woman employee. For example, a woman employee working in a company, okay, with more than 10 employees, and this company has constituted an internal complaints committee under the Posh Act of 2013. If one woman employee faces sexual harassment, she can directly go to the internal complaints committee, and internal complaints committee will investigate the issue, and then accordingly the action will be taken against the male employee. Okay, so this is one responsibility of the employer. The other responsibility or the requirement on the part of the employer is that the internal complaints committee constituted in a company should be headed by a women. Okay, so apart from that, this committee should have at least two women employees as its members and another employee and a third party such as NGO worker with the 5-year experience in these matters should also be part of the internal compliance committee. Okay, so the third requirement is that a act mandates every district. Okay, so in every district across the country there should be a local committee. Okay, there should be a local committee. So please remember, the internal compliance committees address the grievances of formal women employees. Okay, formal women employees. But what about the women employees, or what about the companies who have employees less than 10? Okay, less than 10. Okay, now the act mandates constituting local committees. If a company have less than 10 employees, or if a woman from the informal sector can go to a local committee, and the local committee receive complaints from women working in firms with less than 10 employees. Okay, so not just from the companies with less than 10 employees, it also receives complaints from informal sector, and that includes domestic workers, home-based workers, voluntary government social workers, and so on and so forth. Now, apart from this, the last responsibility or the requirement imposed on the employer by the Posh Act 2013 is that the employer has to file an annual audit report. Okay, so the annual audit report should be given or should be filed with the district officer about the number of harassment complaints filed in a particular year, and also action taken at the end of the year. Okay, so this will help to scrutinize the functioning of the internal complaints committee and whether the internal complaints committee is working in letter and spirit of the Posh Act 2013 or not. Okay, so this is all about the Posh Act, the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act. Okay, now the next important article is government bans import of 928 items to promote domestic defense industry. Okay, so this is with respect to the positive indigenization list. Okay, positive indigenization list. So before actually we proceed discussing this article, we need to understand what is positive indigenization list. Please remember, positive indigenization list essentially means that armed forces, whether it is army, navy, air force, they procure they procure a listed items. They procure the listed items in the positive indigenization list only from the domestic manufacturers. If a particular item or if a particular equipment is part of the positive indigenization list, and that equipment must be procured from the domestic manufacturers. Okay, domestic manufacturers, and this is the positive indigenization list. Okay, now domestic manufacturer includes both of the public sector undertakings and the private companies. Okay, now we understood the positive indigenization list. Please also understand the manufacturers of the equipment, the defense equipment could be private sector players or defense public sector undertakings. The concept of positive indigenization list was rolled out by the defense acquisition procedure in the year 2020. Okay, now what are the objectives of the positive indigenization list? The objectives include reduce import dependence of the defense public sector undertakings on foreign imports, and secondly, harness design capabilities of domestic defense industries. Okay, we have a wide variety of domestic uh, defense industry both in the private sector and the public sector, and this scheme will help harness design capabilities of domestic defense industry. Thirdly, position India as a design leader in these technologies. Okay, so that India can also export defense equipment to other countries. Okay, so this is all part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat program. Okay, making India self-reliant, right? So in this context, we need to understand this news article. The government bans import of 928 items. Now these 928 items now part of the positive indigenization list. Okay, so this will further promote the domestic defense industry, because what does it mean when the government import the ban of 298 items? Okay, so these items now will be part of the positive indigenization list, and these items will be procured by Indian armed forces from the domestic industries only. Okay, so this will further promote domestic defense industry. Now please understand this article. Defense Ministry has imposed a phased ban on import of 928 military items, and this will promote self-reliance. This will promote the self-reliance under the Atmanirbhar Bharat program in defense manufacturing sector. Okay, so the Defense Ministry also announced that this is the fourth positive indigenization list. Okay, so this is the fourth positive indigenization list in continuation of the three such lists. Earlier also the government issued three such lists. Okay, overall all these lists consist of 1238 items. So all these 1238 items will be procured from the domestic manufacturers only. Okay, now, apart from that, the fresh list, the fourth positive indigenization list, consists of 928 military items, and they include line replacement units, subsystems, and spares. Okay, so they come under the phased import ban from December 2023 to December 2029. Now, these 928 items, which are part of the fourth list of positive indigenization list, with the import substitution, the total value of these items 715 crore rupees, and they will be procured from defense industry. So this will help promote defense manufacturing sector and defense manufacturing capabilities in India. However, please also understand the defense public sector undertakings will undertake the indigenization of the fourth list of positive indigenization list items through a different routes. They include Make in India category and in-house development. Okay, so these are the categories which will be used for the manufacturing of the positive indigenization list items. Okay, so whatever content which we have discussed is mentioned in a pictorial form. India Defense Ministry issued the fourth positive indigenization list. Okay, so this list includes another 928 strategically important LRU units, subsystems, spares, components, and they are made under the Made in India program by the defense public sector undertakings plus private defense companies in India, and this will reduce India's import dependence on foreign countries. Now, the next important news article is with respect to the Model Code of Conduct. Okay, so this is with respect to Model Code of Conduct. So you very often hear about the Model Code of Conduct. Now, Model Code of Conduct is issued by the Election Commission. Election Commission, once the election schedule is released in a particular state or overall in general elections to Lok Sabha. Okay, so the Model Code of Conduct does not have any statutory status. Okay, it does not have any statutory status. Now, why Model Code of Conduct is in news? We all know that recently Karnataka elections were concluded and poll results were also announced. Okay, so Election Commission of India is particularly concerned with the increasing violation of the Model Code of Conduct. Increasing violation of the Model Code of Conduct by the candidates and the political parties during election. Okay, since this does not have a statutory status, Election Commission of India does not take any punitive actions against the political parties and the candidates. Okay, so therefore there is been an increasing violation of Model Code of Conduct. Okay, for example, if a candidate who is contesting elections appeal voters on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, etc., and try to gain advantage by spreading hatred, disturbing the communal harmony, then he clearly violates the model code of conduct. Okay, clearly violates the model code of conduct. So, in this context, we will try and understand what is a model code of conduct. Okay, so why it is in news? It is in news because of the Karnataka elections. Okay, it is in news because of the recent Karnataka elections. In the previous instance, also, Election Commission of India issues notice to Assam Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma for violating the Model Code of Conduct. Okay, so this was a previous instance. In the previous instance, also, Election Commission of India issued notice to the Assam Chief Minister. Now, in the recent instance, Election Commission of India is concerned with the violation of Model Code of Conduct in Karnataka elections. Okay, Karnataka elections. Now, what is a model code of conduct? A model code of conduct is a set of guidelines, and they are given by the Election Commission of India that political parties and candidates who are contesting elections have to follow during elections. And secondly, they do not have legal basis and only functions on the consensus of political parties. Please remember, I have told you that the model code of conduct does not have any legal basis. We have set two legislations, that is Representation of People Act 1950 and also Representation of People Act 1951. These two acts governs the registration of a political parties, allocation of seats, etc. This also covers the electoral malpractices and corruptions. However, the model code of conduct is not covered in the either of these acts. Okay, so only functions on consensus of political parties. Okay, because of this reason, there has been an increasing violation of the model code of conduct. Okay, so when the model code of conduct started in India, so it comes into force. So when does it actually start? The model code of conduct comes into force immediately on the announcement of election scheduled by the Election Commission of India, and it is in force until the completion of elections. Okay, now what is the significance of model code of conduct? The significance include the main purpose is to ensure that the ruling parties do not misuse their position of advantage to gain an unfair advantage. Okay, so it provides a equal level playing field between different political parties and also between different candidates. Apart from this, this will eradicate practices such as communal speech, bribes, etc., and are deemed corrupt under the model code of conduct. Okay, now speeches which are spreading hatred, communal speeches, giving bribes to voters. Okay, so all these practices are considered as violation of model code of conduct, and violation of model. This will help prevent such corrupt practices. Now, what are the powers to punish with the Election Commission of India? Now, Election Commission of India can only issue a show cause notice to the violators and bar them from the poll campaign. Okay, so they will not be eligible for the poll campaign even though they are eligible to contest elections. And Election Commission of India can only issue a show cause notice to the candidates who have violated the model code of conduct. Okay, so the concerns with respect to the model code of conduct include Election Commission does not have a judicial powers to decide whether a particular individual or particular candidate violated the model code of conduct or not. And apart from the judicial powers to penalize, it does not have a powers to penalize the violators of the model code of conduct. And this has been making model code of conduct a toothless tiger, and it also leads to the increasing violation of the model code of conduct in various states, both in general elections and in the state legislative assembly elections. And the recent example is Karnataka elections. Okay, so this is all about the model code of conduct. So let's discuss the next article. So the next article is about the windfall tax. Okay, this is about the windfall tax. Now, this news article says that please first understand what is exactly a windfall tax. Now, windfall tax, when a company makes sudden profits, okay, without its actual involvement. For example, during COVID-19 pandemic, there has been, so there has been an increasing demand. Okay, so after the pandemic, once the recovery of the economy started, there has been an increasing demand for crude oil across the country because of the production cuts which were announced by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Okay, so these production cuts were rightly cashed by the refineries and domestic producers, and they have made huge profits. Okay, they have made huge profits. And the windfall taxes, tax the windfall gains of companies. Okay, so this will significantly increase the revenues of the government. So please understand, when a company benefits from something that they have not responsible. Okay, so company benefits from something for which they are actually not responsible. The financial gain that ensures is called a windfall profits. So several companies with respect to the crude oil have made windfall profits in the recent past. Okay, so the government in last year July have first started imposing the windfall tax on crude oil production. Okay, petroleum and crude oil production. Now, governments typically levy at least one time tax over and above the normal rates on tax such profits. Okay, since they are making a windfall profits without actually, they are not responsible for the profits. So the government imposes taxes on such profits, and this tax is called as windfall tax. Now, since energy companies are getting or gaining profit not because of any improvement in their processes, but because of the geopolitical situation. Okay, since because of the geopolitical situation. So this is not really about the COVID-19 pandemic or the economic recovery, but this is with respect to the Russia-Ukraine war. Okay, this is with respect to Russia-Ukraine war. Now, what happened was European Union uh, started its stopped its import of natural gas, and crude oil from Russia. Okay, so apart from this, the OPEC countries also announced the production cuts of crude oil. Okay, so that has significantly increased the demand for the crude oil across the world. Now, the producers of the crude oil and the refineries, because of increasing or significant demand of the crude oil, they have made quick profits. Okay, they have made windfall profits. Okay, so since they have made windfall profits because of the ensuing geopolitical situation, these profits were taxed by the governments under the windfall tax category. Okay, India also imposed the windfall tax on crude oil producers in July. Okay, because they have made profits because of the geopolitical situation, and many governments have considered imposing such a windfall tax on such quick gains, and this will boost government's finances, and it will also help fund efforts to protect the vulnerable sections among because of the rampant inflation. What happens generally, the prices of certain goods increases. Okay, so if food prices increases, then it would be unaffordable for the poor to buy things which are necessary or essential for their survival. Now, in this context, we have discussed that India has also imposed the windfall taxes, okay, on several companies. And what are the options which have compelled India to impose such a windfall taxes? Okay, so there are several reasons. Because the public expenditure on fuel, food, and fertilizer, particularly the subsidies on fuel, food, and fertilizers, are expected to rise. Okay, so this is one reason which has compelled the governments to impose the windfall taxes on the quick profits made by these companies. And secondly, the financial year 23, the fertilizer subsidy budget estimated to be around 1.05 trillion. And thirdly, Oil and Natural Gas ONGC, Oil India Limited, reported bumper profits in March quarter and record earnings in the year 21-22. Okay, so these all reasons have compelled the government of India to impose the windfall tax on domestic crude oil producers. Now, recent development, India cuts windfall tax on petroleum crude to zero. Okay. Now, earlier India imposed the windfall taxes on crude oil producers, but now there is no such windfall tax. Okay. So when there is no such windfall tax, then the crude oil prices will cool off, and they will further reduce. Okay, the central government Monday has slashed the windfall profit tax on domestically produced crude oil. Okay, so this windfall taxes came down to zero in the latest fortnightly review. Now the government left the windfall tax on petrol, diesel, aviation turbine fuel at zero. Okay, so this is actually the recent development on the windfall taxes. Now, India on last July imposed the windfall tax on crude oil producers. Okay, so whoever the crude oil producers, India imposed such a windfall tax. We have discussed the reasons for imposing crude oil taxes, and India also extended the levy on exports of gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel after private refineries wanted to make gains from uh, robust refining margins in overseas markets. For example, if there is an increasing demand for the aviation turbine fuel, diesel, and petroleum across the globe, then the oil refineries, domestic oil refineries or domestic crude oil producers will look to export their oil to foreign countries. Okay, because they get more profits in foreign countries than in the domestic sale domestic sale. Okay, so if they export more and more crude oil, that will result in domestic crude shortages and that will increase the crude oil prices because of shortage crude oil prices, and this will also increase the import bill of India, and this will further increase as inflation. So because of all these reasons, the government has imposed the windfall taxes on these companies as they are making quick profits. Okay, so the tax came into effect as private refineries, Reliance Industries, Naira Energy, they are the actually key buyers of discounted oil from Russian supplies, were reaping profits by aggressively boosting fuel exports instead of domestic sales. Okay, they are preferring the foreign markets instead of selling the crude oil products in domestic markets. Okay, this is the reason for imposing the windfall taxes, and this is all about the windfall taxes. The next important article is with respect to one stop centers for zero waste to be launched across cities. Okay, now we will discuss, this is particularly about the circular economy. Okay, circular economy where the generated waste will be reused generated waste will be reused, and this is part of the sustainable development. Okay, sustainable development effort. Okay, so recently in the Glasgow summit COP26, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also emphasized on life. Okay, lifestyle for environment, and this one stop centers is also in conformity with the lifestyle for environment movement. Now understand, to cut down the waste generation in urban India, the government will launch the one stop centers. Okay, so one stop centers will cut down the waste which is actually generated in urban areas, so where citizens can deposit old clothes, shoes, books, toys, plastic, and that can be recycled and reused. Okay, so old items of the citizens can be deposited at the one stop centers, and where citizens can deposit uh, these used items. Okay, instead of disposing them, they can deposit these used items in one stop centers, and they can be recycled and reused also. Okay, so these special centers, the one stop centers, uh, will be launched nationwide on May 20. Okay, so the emphasis is that reducing, reusing, or recycling of such waste products. Individuals, institutions, commercial enterprises, they can deposit the items at these one-stop centers. And these items will be given to different stakeholders for either reusing or recycling and also refurbishing of these items. In a way, this will reduce the generation of waste, and this will also contribute to a larger circular economy or the larger goal of circular economy. Okay, reduce, recycle, and reuse. This is also called as triple R, and these RRR centers would be set up as part of the nationwide campaign. The name of the campaign is Meri Life, Meri Swachh Shahar. Okay, My Life, My Clean City. Now, under the aegis of Swachh Bharat Mission 2.4 Urban. Okay, so overall, reduce, recycle, and reuse would be set up as part of Meri Life, Mera Swachh Shahar under the Swachh Bharat Mission Urban 2.0. Okay, so this will strengthen citizens' resolve to reduce, reuse, and recycle. The objective of the overall objective of the campaign is to take a collective action for the protection and conservation of environment by adopting the sustainable daily habitats. Okay, so where the emphasis is on 3R: reduce, recycle, reuse, and recollect. Next, the objectives of the campaign is to take collective action for the protection, conservation of environment by adopting sustainable daily habitats. Okay, focus will be on sustainable daily habitats. The three R's form a backbone of waste to wealth. Okay, so they form the backbone of waste to wealth, and it has empowered many craftsmen, recyclers, self-help groups, entrepreneurs, startups. Okay, because recycling waste into host of products, and that has benefited several craftsmen, recyclers, self-help groups, entrepreneurs, and startups. Okay, please also understand the three R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle form the big backbone of waste to wealth. The campaign will be culminated on World Environment Day. The World Environment Day is generally conducted on June 5. Now, this is actually the infographic of the circular economy. So, in the circular economy, what exactly happens is that this is actually raw materials, okay, from the nature. First, the raw materials integrated with the end of life articles or end of life, objects. Now, this includes raw materials plus end of life objects, and they will be recycled. Okay, they will be recycled along with the raw materials. And once they are recycled, the next phase they go through is design. Okay, this is part of the reform. Okay, this is part of the reform, and they will undergo design. And after design, the production and retransformation takes place under reduce. Okay, so next is reuse. Once their production and retransformation takes place, they are transported and distributed, and consumption, use, reuse, and repair takes place. So after that, after consumption, they will be disposed of. Okay, they will be disposed of, and these disposed of, for example, one-stop centers. Okay, recently set up one-stop centers where these items, the already used items, will be disposed of, and the disposed of will be used for producing new items. Okay, the three are reduce, reuse, and recycle. So thereby the waste generated is very minimal. Okay, the waste generated is very minimal, and this will significantly reduces the environmental cost. Okay, environmental cost. So this is all about the one-stop centers and the circular economy. The next article is with respect to the generic medicines. Okay, this is with respect to generic medicines. So we all know that there are two types of medicines in the market. One is generic drugs and the other is branded drugs. Okay, branded drugs. Now please also remember, India is the largest producer of, or largest supplier of generic medicine. India constitute around 20 percentage, or India supplies around 20 percentage of global generic medicines. Right. So recently, the government issued a certain orders to the government doctors, and the orders told that doctors to told prescribe only generic medicines. Doctors should only prescribe generic drugs to the patients. Okay, for example, see, private pharmaceutical companies appoint medical representatives. Okay, so they appoint the medical representatives. These medical representatives are provide incentives to the doctors. Okay, they provide incentives to the doctors for prescribing the branded drugs. Okay, their branded drugs, so that the sale of a particular brand will further increases, even though the less cheaper branded drugs or less cheaper generic drugs are available. Doctors are forced to prescribe branded drugs. They are more expensive because doctors are getting incentives from the pharmaceutical companies. Okay, so that's why the government has prescribed that the doctors should prescribe only the generic medicines to the patients. Now understand what exactly are generic drugs. So generic drugs can be defined as affordable version of branded drugs. Okay, so see, branded drugs are given patent for 10 years. Okay, they are generally given patent for 10 years. Now after the expiry of the patent, these branded drugs are eligible for the manufacturing of generic drugs. Now any company after the expiry of the patent can make generic drugs. Okay, so they will no longer protected under IP, and once their IP is expired, they will be sold in the market as generic drugs. Now, generic drugs are affordable version of branded drugs. So, if you look at the price of branded drug and the generic drug, there is a huge difference. For example, a branded drug is available for 1,000 rupees, and the generic medicine is available for just 250 or 300 rupees. Okay, so this is a huge difference, but the potency and the efficacy of the generic drug and the branded drug is almost same. Okay, the branded drugs which are brought into the market once the original drug manufacturer's patent expires. Okay, they are generally brought into the market once the original drug manufacturer's patent expires. The medicines have the same potency, quality, implications, and work in the identical manner as the branded drug. Now we have to understand the difference between the branded drug and also between the generic medicine. Okay, so given here there are some features of the branded drug and also the generic medicine. Okay, so these are the features of the branded drug and generic medicine. So patents are, they generic drugs do not have patent. Okay, the patent is already expired. However, brand name drugs, the patent protected. Okay, they, so the other companies cannot manufacture, sold the patented drugs without the company's approval. And secondly, trade name marketed under the generic name of the drug. However, they are marketed under a unique proprietary name given by the company, which is a patent reserved. And the generic drugs are manufactured by several pharmaceutical companies other than uh, along with the branded drug company. However, the branded name drugs are developed and manufactured by the innovator company itself. And animal and clinical studies, so they are not required to perform and essential to performing. Okay, so clinical studies are very essential before actually inventing such a drugs. However, for generic medicine they are not required because they are already the category of branded drugs. So when it comes to price, generic drugs are very cheaper and branded name drugs are costly than the generic drugs. And in case of appearance, look different from a relevant brand name drug. However, a unique look as designed during the product development. Now, name variation, same generic drug name in any country. And however, with respect to brand name, so brand name drugs, same or different brand name in different countries. Okay, so these are all the important and most relevant news articles for today's discussion. Okay, so thank you.